towards others, and I have a right to expect that same energy to be emitted back to me. Being treated like a human is not too much to ask, for therefore I will make my petition known unapologetically. That is by Mina B., a licensed psychotherapist based in New York. So welcome everyone to Black Health Trust, and I will turn it over to Dr. Maxey at this time. Everyone is on, well, let me let you know that everyone is muted and we have controlled technical support today. So I want to be sure that everyone uses their mechanisms on their machine. If they need to use the chat, go ahead and put your questions in and we'll make sure we monitor that throughout the call. Thank you, Dr. Maxey.
Thank you very much, Tori. I appreciate you. I'd like to thank
Likewise.
our guests for joining us today to receive credible information regarding health disparities, and in particular at this point in time, COVID-19. I want to assure everybody that we have an excellent group of professional presenters, and we're giving you information for your consumption. However, we're not providing medical information. You must check with your own provider, your own healthcare provider, your own physician for definitive information. It is also true that we're going to give you the best information as of today about protecting yourself and your family. And I'm going to say a few words, and then we'll introduce our distinguished speakers. I'm going to get my slides up. So we do know that it is very key to have good nutrition, and good nutrition is a key to life. As of today, in the United States, the total cases are 6,393,473. Out of that number, there have been a total of 192,444 deaths that have occurred. The new deaths that have occurred as of September 11th are 1,092. So we're averaging over 1,000 deaths per day. I'm concerned that much of what's going on in our corner of the world, the United States, is due to a willful negligence against you and yours. You must take personal responsibility to take care of your family and yourself. We claim to have the most advanced, wealthiest society on earth. We put people on the moon. We developed the most sophisticated electronics in the world. We have the world's biggest, I'm told, and most sophisticated military. But yet and still, communities of color are dying 2.5 to 3 times more than the general population. And when you look back in history, that has always been, and now it's gotten worse. So African Americans, who make up less than 15% of the US population, are making up 30% and more of the deaths that occur. I saw a report today where one of the leaders of the government of Taiwan was interviewed, and he happens to be an epidemiologist educated at Johns Hopkins in the United States. They have a population in Taiwan of 25 million. There have been less than 500 total deaths since the pandemic. The way they did it was emphasizing personal hygiene, but more importantly, having enforced proper quarantine with fines and penalties. I know we as Americans, we like our freedom, And we, as Americans of color, don't like to think about jail and imprisonment, but they do that in Taiwan if you violate what they feel is safe for the rest of the family. And who is the rest of the family? All of the other citizens of Taiwan. Nutrition, which is a main subject of today, is the key to survival. Proper nutrition is required by all body cells, including the immune system. We do know that processed food can severely impact the gastrointestinal tract, and this can result in chronic inflammatory problems of the GI tract, the gut. We know that this can affect the so-called microbiome, which has trillions and trillions of bacteria that reside in a friendly and symbiotic way in our intestinal tract. These microbes that are necessary for a healthy life affect digestion, brain function, your moods, your psychology, and also affects your immune system greatly. So I want to have you listen, take notes to the distinguished presenters we have today. We know that there is a food shortage for almost 20% of people of color, where they do not know that they will have food tomorrow. So one of our speakers, who is a distinguished young attorney by the name of Paula Penn Nabert, earned her law degree at Ohio State University. She is the president of Penn Nabert and Associates Consulting Firm. She did a TEDxT talk and spoke on the issue of nutrition and food. And she is the co-manager of CMN Memorial Gardens. Following her will be another excellent guest, who is Dr. Kedar Prasad, who has a Doctor of Philosophy, a PhD, who is the current the Chief Scientific Officer of Engage Global. He earned his PhD in radiation biology from the University of Iowa. And I'm told they had to create a board and a PhD because he was the first in the world to obtain that particular degree. He has published over 250 papers in peer-reviewed journals, and he is the former president of the International Society of Nutrition and Cancer. Our other speaker is a distinguished graduate of the best medical school in the world, Howard University. He obtained his medical degree.
Don't say
He
that.
is a board certified physician and anesthesiologist. He is a functional integrative medicine practitioner. He is also morphed into a cosmetic surgeon. And I must add, he is also an entrepreneur, as am I. So I think we're in for a treat. I'm going to invite Paula Penn Nabert to begin with our first presentation. Ms. Nabert.
Oh, yeah. Is it okay?
There we go. Thank you. All right. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to attempt to do the shared screen so that I can show you what I have been working on, but I'm having some difficulty with that. So while I'm working on that, let me give you just a brief overview of what I wanted to talk about today, which is spiritual and cultural connections to gardening in Black and Brown communities. And I think this is particularly salient with the overarching topic, even though this garden that I'm focusing on did not begin as a result of or in response to COVID-19. So the short version of this is my husband introduced me to gardening back in, I guess, 1981. So we started this garden when he died in 2013. And let me just stop and ask, I don't know if in terms of showing the slides, which I really wanted to be able to do, but for some reason, I'm not seeing them coming up on my screen. And I don't know if you have the backup slides or not, but
Yes, Simon. Let me check. Simon?
so I thought that I had them, but they're not. I'm having some difficulty. I'm not really a tech person, despite Dr. Maxey's kind introduction to me as young. I'm 65, and so I struggle with some of the same tech stuff that other people do. But while we're working on that, let me just again continue. So,
Dr. Neighbor, you see the green share screen at the bottom?
yes, I
Okay.
do. But when I click that, I see the indicator of shared screens, but the screen that I'm looking for, I'm not seeing that file. That's even
Okay.
though that's what I had looked at earlier, thinking that I would circumvent this exact fact pattern.
Well, that's okay. That's
But
okay. We're patient.
okay, so well then let's just sort of continue. But because the video is, the slides are important, but and interesting, but I think the text is probably more significant.
Mhm.
So when we started this garden my husband died in 2013. We started the garden in 2014. And when we started the garden, we placed the garden in the rear of a church that was founded 110 years ago. So this is a congregation founded by descendants of formerly enslaved Africans. And so it seemed like the perfect place to have this garden. And it's 5,000 square feet. And once we began the garden, we started it as free grief therapy, but it morphed pretty quickly into something else when we realized that biodiversity extends beyond sort of plant biology. And so we realized that we had this massive harvest, and we also began looking at the data for this neighborhood. So the USDA Economic Research Service identifies this neighborhood as a low-income, low-access urban food desert because 35% of the households are at or below the poverty line. The closest supermarket's 4.3 miles away, and it's Whole Foods, and Whole Foods is the closest supermarket. And 13% of the population doesn't have access to a car. So we are looking at a situation in which there's inadequate access to supermarkets, but so you have both what's known as an urban food desert and a food swamp, in that within blocks in any direction, there are any number of small bodegas and corner stores where people can buy a bag of hot Cheetos or 40 ounce, but not real food. So we're using organic methods, and the food that we grow, we sell in an on-site farmer's market for $1 a pound. Even though our church has a fairly large food pantry, as do most Black churches, and food pantries are fine for emergency situations, but food pantries are not an effective strategic way of dealing with food insecurity. And so the idea of reinstituting the idea of self-sufficiency in the production of food was something that we were quite interested in. So we have this on-site farmers market. We sell the food for $1 a pound. The garden itself is biodiverse. We grow fruits, vegetables, herbs, and flowers. We also have free classes. So we do classes on things like square foot gardening. So we instruct people on how to create their own gardens at home, even if they don't have a large space, which is why we rely on square foot gardening and companion planting. We also do classes for children, urban classes. So things like organic chemistry in the garden, in which we have children bring in their families used coffee grounds for nitrogen, used eggshells, which we then dry and mix with vinegar to move it from calcium carbonate to straight calcium. And then banana skins for potassium. And then we create our own ways of providing nutrients to the soil. It's interesting, and Epsom salt for magnesium. So frequently children will come and say, oh, Miss Paula, the zucchini leaves are turning yellow. I think there's a mineral deficiency. And so to have an 8-year-old tell me that is really significant. So last year we had our first pilot day camp, STEM to STEAM, it's all in the garden. We also are partnering with the College of Engineering at Ohio State. So we have a farm bot, which is a robotic farm arm that works in the garden, so that the children then have exposure to STEM studies and mathematics. Because part of what we've identified in our own research is when there is an insufficiency in food and health disparities, there's also typically a disparity in educational opportunities. So my late husband, again, was the one who introduced me to gardening when we had our children. We had our twins the summer before my last year in law school. So when I graduated, they were 13 months old. Now they're 40 years old now, so they're old and crusty. But that was, so I had the twins while I was in law school. I stayed at home for a year after we had them, after I graduated, and then I had a third son. And at that point, we were both working for AT&T on the divestiture project. So we'd had this sort of corporate experience. But ultimately, I left in 1986 and started this business. But when we began gardening, it was because when we had the children, I had nursed them for the first year and then started to buy baby food. And my husband said, oh, sweetie pie, we don't know who's bottling that. We need to grow our own food, which was 1981. And I thought that was pretty absurd. But in retrospect now, this idea of self-sufficiency, so we are self-employed. We've always grown most of our own food. When we had the children and I said, who do you think has time for this? And he said, gardening is like parenting and pastoring. They all require the same daily attention to detail, same posture of humility, head bowed, body bent. So people who don't have time to garden probably don't have time to parent. So this issue of being self-sufficient from a business perspective, I think and then incorporating that was somewhat easier for us because both my late husband and I come from families that have been in this country since the late 1700s. So one of the fun facts that we found out when we started dating was my great-grandmother, my maternal great-grandmother, was at Bluefield State Teachers College in 1898, as was his paternal grandfather, James Neighbor, was at Morehouse in 1898. So both of us come from families that have been involved in lifelong marriages, as long as it's been legal for Black people to do so, and pursuing post-secondary education, as long as it's been legal for Black people to do so. So our children, my husband saw our children as heirloom seeds. And so this idea of creating an ideal health environment for them was a very holistic thing. So we ultimately also homeschooled our children. So we homeschooled them until the twins went to Princeton and our youngest son went to Amherst. So this idea of really being very, very particular about how the body is nurtured, both in terms of nutrition that is physiological as well as psychological and spiritual. So our children, where this garden is at the Church of Christ of the Apostolic Faith. My adult children are 5th generation in this congregation. So this idea of heirloom food and heirloom seed is something that, so biodiversity goes beyond just plant biology. It's a holistic issue. But I think probably in my efforts to find the slides, I've probably overextended my time. I promised Dr. Maxey that I would leave time for questions. So I don't know if you wanted to do the questions now or at the conclusion.
We'll take some questions now. First of all, I thank you for your presentation. I'd like your comments on how this type of garden can help solve the problem of decreased food availability, especially in communities of color. And what are your recommendations that many of us who have only a flower pot, let alone a few acres, can you address how this can be invoked to help us protect ourselves in the future? Many of us predict that this pandemic is going to be here at least the next year.
Mhm.
Yes, I agree. The research piece is compelling. So in my real life, our primary work is we do demographic research and statistical analysis. So our largest, most consistent client over the last 20 years has been the U.S. Department of Energy. So the research that we do is fairly quantitative. And yes, thank you. And so I have been very concerned about the long-term impacts of this pandemic. In fact, last month I sat in on a webinar with the CEO of Land O'Lakes, which, as you know, is a massive player in the agribusiness industry. And the prediction there is that it's not just that the pandemic is going to be longer in its duration than what we may have originally been led to believe, but the intersecting complications, both when we look at what has happened with the increased focus on immigration law and deportation. So we have larger numbers of immigrants that we would be relying upon historically to manage the actual harvesting of food in fields. That actual number has been reduced. The other complication is those people who are still doing that work are adversely affected by the pandemic in that they are not in position often to self-quarantine. So that's had a huge impact. Similarly, we see the same kinds of challenges with distribution systems. So when food is produced in the fields, how does that food then get transported? And so the impact on the trucking industry has also been significant. So when we see these sort of clips of farmers with food rotting in the field or farmers pouring out milk, it's because typically agribusiness is business to business transactions. And so when hotels and cruise lines and restaurants and planes are no longer operational, those products are prepared for that market. So to take a 600-pound block of cheese and then to suddenly change that into 600 1-pound blocks of cheese, most of these agribusinesses are not prepared to make that kind of pivot
Yes.
that quickly. So there's that piece. That is going to have a dramatic negative impact on food access in Black and Brown communities. And ultimately is going to have a chilling effect on the availability of food at food banks, because food bank food comes from surplus. In fact, arguably, there's this argument that, in fact, food that was just one step away from being thrown in the trash comes to the food bank, and then those who donate that then also get a tax credit. So it's seen as a tax deduction issue because it's a charitable contribution. But if the principal product line is reduced, there will not be excess or surplus for distribution through food banks, which goes directly to your point, Dr. Maxey, about the necessity of creating a sense of independence. So we have a number of hashtags that we've been using to try to get people to think about this differently. The first is, he started us in a garden for a reason. So even wherever you are in the Abrahamic tradition or even outside the Abrahamic tradition, we see this sort of philosophical and ideological orientation to humans in gardens as places of spiritual healing. There's also, our second hashtag is, we were brought here to cultivate. we noticed when we began building this garden, it was an empty field. And it's not acres. As I said, this garden is only 5,000 square feet. So this is not a huge agricultural operation, but this was a fallow field. And what I've noticed is that many, many Black churches have space around them that is just lawn. That's all, just lawn. So we took that space and we bought 700 feet of untreated lumber. My sons and my nephews built the 40 raised beds, lined them with cardboard for organic weed control. We bought 40 tons of organic soil. That first year we planted 3,000 seeds. One of the things that we've had a hard time getting people to think about is, and this sort of intersects with this idea of post-traumatic slave syndrome. So we have lots of people come by the garden during this process of construction, because obviously we all have regular jobs. So this is something that happens on Saturdays, over a series of Saturdays. And people were coming by and saying to me, now, baby, I know your kids went to good schools. They don't have to do that. And I was the first time somebody said that, I thought that's kind of weird. But then I kept hearing the same thing. And then I kept hearing people say, you know, I left Alabama so I wouldn't have to do that. I went to school so I wouldn't have to do that. The idea of this is something that's left to people who don't have other options, as opposed to this is the way I heal my own body and keep myself healthy.
Let me raise it. First of all, that is a most salient point that you raise, because I have a PhD or an MD or a JD. I'm too educated to do this.
Right.
But you find that if you don't protect yourself, if you don't take personal responsibility, you cannot continue to depend on other people.
Right.
Now, I live in the hood, I work in the hood, I should say. If I want to go to the food in my neighborhood, the collard greens are wilted if they have them. The food is not high quality, but if I go to Beverly Hills, everything is sparkling.
Right.
How can your solution be broadened so a broader number of our people can share in that type of produce? And then secondly, how can we change these attitudes of being superior to feeding your family?
Well, I think those are both compelling questions. I think that the idea of doing for self is something that we know is part of our heritage. We have stepped away from that, and I think that that's unfortunate. So that whole idea that everything that's legal is not expedient, you know, to go to that scriptural point, everything that's legal for me is not expedient. There are some things that we need to recapture. And a lot of that has to do with this idea of self-sufficiency. So you don't need the thing that's amazing about food production is you don't need a huge amount of space, and you can do it collaboratively. So if you have a 4x4 bed, you can grow hundreds of pounds of green beans in one 4x4 bed. And even if you don't have a 4x4 bed, if you have pots, you can grow tomatoes, you can grow peppers. And we start all of our plants from seed. I buy open pollinated non-GMO seed, and I start the seeds in my house. I think the biggest challenge is reorienting how we think about this work. And similarly with somebody asked a question about preserving. So when I've had classes on how to make pickles, how to make jams, how to make tomato sauce, how to put up and can your own food, I've had a lot of people act like, you know, I don't do that. And what I've had to say to people is, I'm sorry, I went to Wellesley. And before I went to Wellesley, I went to an all-girls elite prep school. And then I went to Wellesley, and then I went to law school, and I've written 5 books, and I started my own business in 1986. And I'm not too good to cook for my family, and you're not either.
Excellent.
And this whole idea of, do you want to spend time cooking or do you want to spend time getting your prescriptions filled? See, I'm not trying to get my prescriptions. I'm 65 years old. I don't have any prescriptions. Okay. I don't have any prescriptions because I control what I eat. And that's something I think we have to change how we think about. As a man thinketh, so he is. So as we shift our thoughts, we will shift our conduct and behavior.
So
Wow.
if you want to be a good-looking, educated lawyer who went to Wall Street, you need to be a farmer and take care of your family. I thank you for your
Right.
presentation.
That was fantastic.
Are there any items in
There,
the chat box?
there were not, but I just wanted to say one tidbit for anybody who wishes to share their slides. You must be in your open files, then share your screen. So thank you for that, Cynthia. And there are not any other questions in the chat box. However, I just want to reiterate that garden food is the best food and it tastes wonderful. But I would like to give you a couple of housekeeping. If anyone's trying to order any mask online as we speak, I would like to let you know that by popular demand, we have met our goal and people are requesting more masks. So we discovered that over the week, what was happening when people were trying to order last week. So that's a good thing. So I just want to let you know that there's expressed interest for more. And so we'll look into replenishing that in the future, and we will let you know when that occurs. So in addition to that, I would like to let you know also that I am a proud member of Black Health Trust family, whose mission is to provide credible information and insight from our community health experts. We are so grateful to the numerous health professionals that have donated their time to the Dynamic Sunday program since the beginning of the pandemic. Our goal is to inform and help people of color become and stay healthy. Black Health Trust is developing the structure for a well-managed nonprofit organization, and our continued success depends upon your contributions. Please consider a modest donation, as every dollar counts. Visit our website at blackhealthtrust.org to donate via credit card with PayPal, as well as with Cash App and Black Health Trust. Please see the chat box for a link in our website for donations and other valuable information. I'd like to thank you for that. And thank you, Dr. Paula Penn-Nabrit, for a wonderful presentation. And we'll turn it back over to Dr. Maxey.
Thank you very much, Tori. We've had a plethora of very well-respected health providers and community leaders and attorneys come to donate their time to speak to us each week. And many of them have joined our advisory committee, and we have great plans to expand our audience. And I give praise and thanks to all of them. I'd like to go now to our next speaker, who is Dr. Kedar Prasad. We've introduced him already. I'm very excited about hearing what Dr. Prasad has to say. He is the first person with a doctorate, and I understand the field is radiation biology. That's way above my pay grade. Dr. Prasad, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. I will try to see if I can get my slides.
Okay.
Let's see, I think so that goes. So I go to share a screen.
Yeah, you're in your open file.
Open file, let me see. So share the screen, then
Yes.
let's see.
Let's see what happens.
It does it simply say basic advanced files, maybe. No?
Simon, can you advise him?
Oh, okay. While he's looking for that, a question just popped up about obesity and our diet.
Read it. Go ahead and read the question.
Okay, can you speak to the issue of obesity among healthcare workers? Is there a conversation about the problem and any sense of urgency?
Let me speak to that while the doctor is getting his slides ready. Simon, if you can help him get a slide.
Simon? Yeah, Simon, see if you can navigate internally.
Okay. However, obesity is a problem. It's a problem of genetics. It's a problem of diet. It's a problem of lack of exercise. And it's a problem that is solved by the food energy that you take in and the food energy that you put out. It happens also when there are processes that take place in the brain. When your body, for example, prepares for a high sugar or high fat intake, it often has something called a cephalic reaction. And it allows food to be deposited in what's called a centripetal deposition around your waist, around your stomach, and your gut. When that is in that area, you become shaped like an apple versus a pear.
Mm,
That centripetal deposition of fat is bad on your heart, it's bad on your kidneys, and it also produces almost 50 potentially toxic hormones, including tumor necrosis factor, angiotensin 2. It affects diabetes, or even can produce diabetes, can produce plaque. So we will talk about obesity. I'm sure some of the speakers will, but there's no difference in a healthcare worker and a regular person. In fact, we did a survey with a group called the Executive Leadership Council years ago. And these men and women are some of the highest paid, highest ranking Black executives in the United States. But when we did a full health screening, we found that they had the exact same percentage of health risk factors, comorbidities, including obesity, as did people of the lowest socioeconomic level in the United States. So a lot of it doesn't have to do with just your position in society, but rather how you manage your diet, your intake, your life. And there are consequences to the way that you eat and take care of yourself. That's why if I had it to do over again today, I would make the title Personal Responsibility that you must have. Dr. Prasad?
uh-oh, he's muted. Simon, can you unmute? Okay.
Yeah, I have it, but can you see that? It is behind the screen. I can see that. I don't know how to bring it to the main
Judy,
front.
I'm not
He's
muted.
not answering his phone.
Dr. Prasad, do you see how to share your screen?
Okay, yeah, let me see. Press it. Oh, okay, I think, yeah, okay.
Did you make him the host, Simon?
Yeah, it is, but it's too small, but let's see. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Maxey and Tori, helping out.
So if you press
Shall I
slideshow,
start now?
press slideshow and it will get
Yeah.
big.
Okay. The title of my talk, thanks very much for participating in it, and I appreciated Dr. Maxey for inviting me to this meeting. The title is Micronutrient Immune System and COVID-19 Infection. And as Dr. Maxey indicated, I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of Engage Global. During the evolution period of thousands of years, humans have been exposed to harmful bacteria and viruses all the time. And at that time, there was no treatment available to them. Only determining factor was their immune system. Those who did not get infected must have had an excellent immune system. Those who got infected but recovered must have an adequate functioning immune system that eliminated the infective agent successfully. And those who died must have poor immune system. Next question is, how does our immune system kills harmful bacteria or viruses? Our immune system monitors 24 hours a day for any invading harmful bacteria or viruses or any kind of harmful organism. As soon as the immune system detects any foreign invading bacteria or viruses, it sends immune cell signal to eliminate infective agents. After that, our immune cell, like lymphocyte, produce a specific antibody to kill the infective agent. This is the way our immune system takes care of any foreign invading harmful bacteria or viruses. This is the overall mechanism. Now, at the end of 2019, a new virus causing pneumonia was discovered in Wuhan city of China. And actually, origin of these viruses are in bats. And in bats, these viruses are non-pathogenic. They don't produce any harmful effect. And World Health Organization named this new virus as COVID-19 or COVID virus disease 19. You can see that the next slide, this slide is COVID virus outside the cell. And you can see the corona, which is called a spike. And these spikes are very important because they are the one which binds with the cell and enters into the cell and then cause all kind of problem. The next slide is the virus inside the cell. You can see that these viruses are dividing very rapidly within the cells and they kill the cells. So this is very, very interesting. The question is, why does COVID-19 is very, very infection in comparison to previous coronaviruses? One reason is that COVID-19 has a greater affinity to bind with the host receptors. And this receptor called is a long name, angiotensin converting enzyme 2. This is the receptor that other coronaviruses have it, but they are very small amount. But this coronavirus has a higher binding affinity with these receptors than any other previous coronaviruses. Lung cells and intestine cell have highest level of these receptors, which may explain why the symptoms of acute respiratory distress and diarrhea occur in patients with infected coronaviruses. Next question is always with us, why the older person and those with pre-existing diseases are more sensitive to infection? One of the reasons is that older individuals and those with pre-existing diseases, such as obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, have poor immune system. This has been very well documented in the scientific literature. And because of that, because of poor immune system, it makes them very sensitive to infection of this virus. In addition to that, tobacco cigarette smoking or electronic or e-cigarette smokers are also very sensitive to COVID because of the poor immune system. So immune system plays a very central role in determining how quickly you can get infected or not. Now the next question is why the immune function becomes poor in these individuals. There is several reasons. One of them is that these kind of individuals who are very sensitive to COVID infections, like older people and people with pre-existing disease, all of them have increased production of free radicals in their body. And free radicals are very, very, very highly reactive molecule that damages your cell. They also have a high level of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and these are very harmful molecules to your system. Second is the deficiency, like Dr. Maxey was mentioning about nutrition, deficiency of one or more micronutrient will contribute to the poor immune system. And that kind of diet would be, poor diet would be that it doesn't have too much fruits or vegetable would be defined as a poor diet. Obesity, people who are obese, and if people have measured these parameters, they have high level of oxidative stress because of production of high level of free radicals. Even in the case of advancing age, people like me, and had a high level of, supposed to have a high level of free radicals and pro-inflammatory cytokines. Tobacco smoking and alcoholism also increases the production of free radicals and inflammation. Chronic diseases or chronic stress can contribute also to poor immune system. How does the immune system receives information that virus has entered our body? When the cell becomes infected with the virus, they release a chemical called cytokines. And these cytokines send signal to the immune system to send immune cells such as neutrophil, macrophages, and T cell to fight the infection. And they go indeed, these immune cells will go near the site of infection, like lung in this case, if you have lung infected, and they engulf these viruses and kill them because they have a lot of digestive enzyme and they kill them. And then after that, then other immune cell like lymphocyte, they produce antibodies which directly kills the viruses. Now, what are the symptoms of COVID infection? All of you probably have read in the newspaper. There's a high fever, dry cough, fatigue, muscle pain, difficulty in breathing, headache, vomiting, and diarrhea in some cases if the intestine is involved. There's another thing which is a preliminary data that shows the damage among survivors, those people who had infection and they survived. And they in a preliminary study, this is not a solid study, this is a preliminary study in some cases, they found that the survivors had a lung fibrosis. In other words, lung is replaced by fibrotic tissue, and therefore you have a difficulty in breathing. Another type of effect that they have observed among survivors is cardiomyopathy, which is a form of heart disease. In addition to that, damage to the kidney and brain function are also noted among those who survived the coronavirus infection. So these are the issue even among the survivors. They also feel fatigue, and so the question is why it happens. And the question is what you can do to take care of all these issues that we discussed. For example, right now, we have an excellent guideline for prevention of infection, like must have a face mask, social distancing, and contact tracing. These are excellent recommendations that all of should follow to prevent infection. But those people who already have some infection, what can be done to them? Or they are asymptomatic, but they don't know if they have infection. And those who have just infection and have not addressed to an advanced stage. And these people, again, have a very high level of oxidative stress and inflammation. As you know, in some cases, if the damage becomes so severe that they have what is called a cytokine storms. Because when you do nothing and your immune system is poor, the virus take over everything and causing cell death. And when cell death occurs, then you have this kind of cytokine storms. And that's why at that point, one of the classical drugs is dexamethasone, which is a very powerful anti-inflammatory agents. So the question is, how does micronutrient can improve your immune function? How does micronutrient improve immune function? Micronutrient protect immune system from damage caused by free radicals and pro-inflammatory cytokines. There is extensive literature available that this is the case, that micronutrient like antioxidant will protect against free radical damage as well as against the inflammation like pro-inflammatory cytokines. Micronutrient also improve the ability of each immune cell to fight infection. So when neutrophil goes there, they are more able to fight and engulf the viruses and kill them. Micronutrient also improve the ability of lymphocyte to produce more antibodies. And again, all these things I have not made it up. It is all supported by extensive amount of literature. And so in the end, I would say that you take it good, first, you follow the guideline, mask, face mask, social distancing, these are the must, and contact tracing. But in addition to have a good diet. A good diet implies have a fresh fruits and vegetable, low calorie diet, and healthy lifestyle. Don't smoke, do some meditation, do anything to reduce your stress. No, not much alcohol, maybe once a week, once in a while you can have alcohol, but not much alcohol. And so if you combine your good diet and healthy lifestyle and with a micronutrient supplement, you can have a good immune system to fight this virus infection, or potentially in future, there could be another coronavirus, 20 or 22, or some totally different kind of viruses. And if you have immune system is in excellent shape, then you will see that you will be able to protect yourself against any kind of today's infection or future infection. Thank you. And I will be glad to answer if you have any question.
Well, thank you so much for your very astute presentation. I want to pose a fictional situation to you. I hope it's fictional. If I was offered to have a heavyweight fight with Michael Tyson, the former heavyweight champion, and they said you've got 6 months to get in shape to fight this guy, and I'm making him akin to this virus, how would I best get in shape? Because if I win the fight, I will win $100 million. If I lose the fight, I'll probably be dead.
Yeah.
So Michael Tyson is synonymous with the
right. Yeah.
What should I do?
Yeah, I think you have as I mentioned, you have a good diet. That's like you mentioned yourself. You have a good lifestyle, healthy lifestyle, do exercise, lose weight, make sure that you maintain your weight, and take a micronutrient supplement. Three things will
What
make
is
you,
micronutrient?
beg your pardon?
What is exactly a micronutrient?
Micronutrient, anything outside the, say, for example, outside the protein, fat, carbohydrate, anything outside the major one is a protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Outside, those are called macronutrient, and micronutrient, anything outside that, which includes the minerals, which includes the vitamins, which includes also antioxidants, some of which antioxidants we take from the diet, some of which our body makes it, and some of which, like phytonutrient, we get from nature, like resveratrol or curcumin, things like that.
So what kind of foods are the best containers of micronutrients, and can we get enough micronutrients from our diet, or do we need to
No,
supplement?
it is difficult. First, it is difficult to have a diet. People have been saying this: modify your diet forever. But humans are such that it is difficult for human to follow the guideline. So theoretically, it is possible, but in practice, it has not been possible to maintain a good diet that can provide you enough micronutrient to make your immune system in a very good shape. And so I think, again, when I say the diet has to be a low caloric diet with fresh fruits and vegetables. I mean, people have been saying this thing for a long time, but human behaviors are tough to change. And then, well, follow as much as you can, and healthy lifestyle. We have been saying that don't smoke, but people are still smoking. And but nothing, we can say that all those things, and they should do at least as much as possible. And then macronutrient comes into picture, which then elevate further. Your body can have a more informed way of all the time. If you have taking a supplement, high level of these nutrients that can protect your immune system from oxidative stress, as well as from inflammation, and at the same time, make the immune cell more capable to fight infection. So immune system become very critical.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another basic question. What exactly is, in layman's terms, is oxidative stress and free radicals?
Yeah, that's a good question. Oxidative free radicals. Free radicals in your body are produced all the time. Anytime you use oxygen, for example, they generate free radicals. And so free radicals are a molecule which has an unpaired electron. In other words, every molecule has a paired electron, make them a neutral. But when they become unpaired, they become very reactive, very easily to damage the DNA, RNA, any part of the cell. So these are called free radicals, which have an unpaired electron, and therefore they are very reactive. And what is oxidative stress? When our body produces a free radical all the time, but we have a defense system that takes care within certain limit. When that limit overpasses, like as we grow older, or when we smoke, or when we have poor lifestyle, then they overtake it. In other words, they are producing much more free radicals than our body can handle it. We call them oxidative stress.
Go ahead.
And they are very damaging. And when oxidative stress damages cells, then cell needs to either recover or die. When they recover, they invite immune cell to send a anti-inflammatory cytokine to heal it. But they can't heal it, then they set a chronic inflammation, and that is very, very harmful.
So from what you've talked about, it seems like if you have obesity, if you have diabetes uncontrolled, if you have high blood pressure, and if you have stress, those are things that contribute to having lots of free radicals.
Yeah, right. Lots of free radical, lots of inflammation. Yes, sir.
So we need to learn how to be cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tori, are there any questions in the chat box? I think you need to unmute. Make sure.
Yeah, Simon had to do it for me. I didn't have any control over that for the moment. Forgive. one of the primary things he pretty much answered, and that was giving some examples of the micronutrients. However, it says World Health Organization recommendations is to adding iron, zinc, vitamin A, and vitamin D. Is that correct, Dr. Prasad?
I don't know. Yeah, they may have recommended, but that's not a correct recommendation. And the reason is because, iron deficiency anemia in this country is very rare. In a poor country like, many developing countries could be a problem. But iron has a double-edged sword. A certain amount of iron is very necessary for your health. But slight excess of iron in your body can increase the risk of all human chronic diseases. If you go on a PubMed and look the internet research search that iron and disease, you will have 1,000 of papers showing that iron can slight increase in iron stored in your body can increase the risk of many human chronic diseases. And the reason is because iron will combine with a molecule like vitamin C and generates a lot of free radicals. So why you will use, but if you have anemia, then they will say, yeah, you take iron and take vitamin C because they want to absorb more vitamin C. And so in the presence of antioxidant, iron get absorbed better. So that's why they recommend it. But generally for normal people, if you take iron supplement, that's dangerous because it will interact, it will increase the body storage of iron level. And when there are increased iron stored in your body, it will increase the risk of many chronic diseases. Wow. And so if copper, then we apply to all trace mineral, iron, copper, and manganese. These are again, very essential for your health. Tiny amount, that's why they are called trace minerals.
Trace minerals.
Very tiny amount your body needs it. But if you get slight excess, it can increase the risk of many chronic diseases.
So is it safe to say that you don't always have to follow the directions on the bottle? You know your body. You need to know your body.
Yeah. And so body has a antioxidant like vitamin A, C, E, and that we take from the diet because our body don't make it. But our body makes it like antioxidant like glutathione. They make coenzyme Q10. But we also know from research, there are some other interesting antioxidants that are very powerful anti-inflammation, like resveratrol, which you take from the grapes, and curcumin that I use in chicken curry all the time, added curcumin. But these two are called also phytonutrient. Our body doesn't make it, but indirectly, we once in a while, we eat in the diet, through the diet. You can be called diet-free, but we don't take very frequently. So you take some extra resveratrol or curcumin that further aids to your body that is needed for optimal immune function.
So there's a question I have. I'm going to invite you to meet with the medical advisory committee of the Black Health Trust. And there's some controversial issues that we want to bring up with that group of providers.
Sure.
One of which I want to put on the table for them is that in my 50 years of medical practice, I find a resting iron deficiency anemia in at least 60+% of African Americans. But that's something we can discuss offline. Tori, are there any?
Yeah, that's a very interesting. If it's iron deficiency anemia, then you have to take iron supplement. But again, as soon as the deficiency is corrected, for example, short time, month, 2 months, 6, whatever time is corrected, then I start taking extra amount except what you take through the diet. That means, the people who have this 60% deficiency of iron must not be taking richest source of iron is meat and some other things, but that's the richest source of iron. So if people are not having enough iron, it could be also iron is not being absorbed, but that's unlikely. It is mostly that their diet is deficiency in iron, and if this is the case, then you must take iron and then vitamin C together because then you can correct it quickly.
Okay, Tori.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes. Yes, Dr. Maxey. What are 1 to 3 supplements that you would recommend, Dr. Prasad. It says, for example, one single vitamin that offers multiple benefits instead of taking one vitamin for E, then another for D. Is
No,
there
no,
one that you recommend?
no. The single vitamin, as you know, single vitamin in human, single vitamin in animal model of any disease, so that is Alzheimer or a cancer, they produce very good results. But in human trial with single antioxidant has been either no effect or has been adverse effect. Like, as you remember, beta carotene trial, which was done in a very prestigious university and among smokers. But smokers have a very high production of free radical, very high oxidative environment because they smoke, and people have measured it. So if you take one single antioxidant like beta carotene or vitamin E, in that environment, they will be oxidized and then act as a free radicals rather than as an antioxidant. I mean, people should have known this. This is well known. This is not my discovery. This is well known in the nutrition field that a single antioxidant in the environment of high free radical production will be oxidized and then act as a free radical or pro-oxidant rather than as an antioxidant. So that's no. I rather have no um, antioxidant than have one or two.
Okay. Any other questions in the chat box?
Well, I was gonna say that response to her question, if it's a,
Are there any other questions in the chat box, Tori? Okay. I'd like to go to our chairman of our administrative committee, is Mr. Carl Brooks, on for a brief statement. Mr. Brooks.
Good afternoon. The importance, or the most important thing that we all can do going forward, is to vote. We got to stay attuned to the issues, and we have to vote. Your life does depend on it going forward. So we got to recommend that everybody that participates in this program express their voting abilities and vote. In addition to that, the information on this program is outstanding. We have a high level of intellectuals providing information. We need to take advantage of this, and we need to support the programs that come from the Black Doctors Trust.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to again thank Dr. Prasad for his excellent presentation. And we're going to have more discussion with him, and I'm going to seriously invite him to join our advisory committee so we can have some rousing discussions around his area of specialty. And one more thing, tell me exactly what is radiologic biology. Explain that for me.
Radiation biology is to study the effect of X-ray or gamma rays on a human body, what damage it can produce, what we can do to protect it. Radiation biology is the study of radiation, which is ionizing radiation like X-ray or gamma ray. And so all radiology department or all the national laboratory study radiation biology because, we are facing, for example, medical exposure. We go to diagnostic procedure. They're all X-ray based. And so radiation biology is just the discipline where you study the effect of radiation on a cellular, on molecular level, and how one can protect it against such damage. That's my specialty.
Well, thank you so much. We've got a talk coming up next week on the effects of ultraviolet light in COVID and how it can affect a potential cure as well as diagnosis. And I guarantee you don't inject it through the blood vessels at all, as a certain politician has said. and that will be presented by another MD, PhD electrical engineer. We have topics coming up other in nutrition by a U.S. Navy Vice Admiral or 3-star Admiral and also educator. And we're going to be having sessions aimed at teenagers and adolescents in the near future. I'd like to recognize a good friend of mine who is a faith leader in the Atlanta area, and I'd like him to speak for just a few moments, and if we're lucky, he may give us a brief rendition. Is Pastor Shaveen Jones available? Pastor Jones? If not, he'll let us know when he comes. Is the famous Brenda Lee Ager available? Either I'm striking out or I'm getting beat by the mute button. Well, very good. We will go on to our next presentation.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
This is Brenda Yeager saying good morning. And this is always my good time to learn and be aware and being made more aware of our fabulous physicians and scientists and doctors. You're so well appreciated. And to all of us, we have to keep going because we know this too shall pass. As long as we keep our head to the sky. And that's what we're going to do. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Brenda. I appreciate you so much.
Anytime, always. Thank you, my brother.
Okay. This Pastor Shaveen, make sure you dial in. Okay, Simon, I need you to unmute Pastor Shaveen Jones, the 404 number. Okay.
Technical difficulties.
I'm going to go on to our next speaker, who is a distinguished anesthesiologist and cosmetic surgeon. As you may know, in medicine, we have a number of fields that are very important. And one of the newer fields in medicine is called functional medicine. And the legitimacy of these doctors is very high in that they seek to find the real basis of dysfunction and disease in the human body. And it is so important that we treat the body not only with nutrition and micronutrients, but behaviorally, and not always just depend on the sledgehammer, often represented by pharmaceuticals. So I want to invite Dr. Michael Carter, who's very distinguished. We've had a number of discussions, to take the floor. Dr. Michael Carter.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Maxey, for inviting me to speak to the Black Health Trust community. So, as you stated before, yes, I am quite entrepreneurial. And I sit on a number of companies as chief medical advisor and chief medical officer. But I just want to give a brief overview of kind of my history and my journey, because it's very, important to this conversation today. So yeah, I started out as an anesthesiologist, practiced that for 16 years, then became a cosmetic surgeon. But I ultimately had to transition out of both of those disciplines because I have a long history of glaucoma, 35 years plus, which has caused me to have impairment of my vision over the years. And, I was in consult with God to try to find something that went beyond what traditional medicine was often offering in terms of, eye drops and surgeries, which I've had, and I'm still on multiple eye drop medications and have had a number of surgeries. But I wanted to seek something alternative to stop the progression of this disease process and also look at reversing it. So that's when I found functional medicine, and it really truly opened my eyes as to some of the underlying causes. So what did I find? Next slide, please. In the functional medicine realm. So what became quite apparent was that glaucoma is basically a sick eye in a sick body. And it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, for other systemic diseases. And what was most unsettling, as I found out through my business partners, Dr. Thomas Lewis, who's a MIT PhD and Harvard grad, and Dr. Clement Trimp, who was a Harvard trained ophthalmologist, that glaucoma was also a potential precursor for Alzheimer's disease. And as you see over to the right, Dr. Lewis and Dr. Trimp wrote the book, The End of Alzheimer's, which is basically looking at the underlying causes of Alzheimer's disease and how to reverse it, including Parkinson's and dementia and so forth, from more of a functional medicine and integrative medicine standpoint. And the things that actually were elucidated at the top of the list were subacute infections, things like Lyme disease, mycoplasma pneumonia, cytomegalovirus, chlamydia pneumonia, Epstein-Barr virus, herpes simplex. Some of these you may have heard of and some you may have not. But suffice it to say that all of us have one or more of these underlying infections. And as was talked about by the previous presenter, it is incumbent upon our immune system to be able to keep these infections at bay. Next slide, please. What else? Yes. So what else did I find? Other eye diseases were also implicated in neurodegenerative diseases, such as cataracts. We see here, this is also another sick eye in a sick body syndrome. And we see this young girl who was exposed to Ebola, and she has a cataract. And this happened in numerous individuals who were exposed to Ebola, by the way. But we now know that this is, an inflammatory process that can be expressed in the eye. And we see off to the right where eye diseases actually can be deadly. So cataracts, macular degeneration, glaucoma, etc., show a significant increase in early death, and mainly due to cardiovascular disease. And of course, cardiovascular disease, we know, is a key component with coronavirus and having bad outcomes. Next slide. So briefly, what is functional medicine? Dr. Maxey did describe it quite well. And it really truly is finding out the root causes of various disease processes in the chronic disease spectrum. And traditional medicine is, of course, very good at acute diseases and syndromes and so forth, but can be challenged when it comes to chronic diseases. And of course, we see that because people are on 5, 10, 15 different medications sometimes, and that isn't really necessarily halting the process. So functional medicine is really truly dedicated to finding the underlying causes of that and treating those causes. So changing your diet, being on the correct supplementation, and a whole host of things. So there is an absolute need to have collaboration between functional medicine, integrative doctors, and traditional doctors. And it's awesome because I've watched a number of the previous Black Health Trust webinars, and a number of the doctors are very integrative and totally understand the need for functional medicine approaches and so forth. Next slide. So now we see in this scenario where chronic disease is on the rise. And again, kind of going back to why functional medicine is necessary, we see these two individuals who are, the top of the food chain in traditional medicine, so to speak. So we have Mr. Tyson here, who was the CEO of Kaiser Permanente, the largest healthcare database and practice in the nation. And he suddenly died at age 60. We see Mr. Warner, who is the president of the American Heart Association, and age 57, he suffered a massive heart attack while at an American Heart Association meeting. So in the middle here, we see that chronic disease is pretty much on a meteoric rise. So there are ways, from a functional medicine approach to really, truly address these things. Next slide. And what we've done at our company, I'm the corporate medical director for Real Health Clinics, which is a company dedicated to reversing Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia, and also the chief medical officer of Health Revival Partners, which is a company dedicated to bringing functional medicine to the masses, because functional medicine doctors, it is often probably greater than 99% of the time not covered by insurance. So it can get expensive, and but what we've developed is something that we can get to the masses to effect change. So we've published a couple of papers this year, and as spoken about by the last lecture, the cytokine storm, of course, is key in having bad outcomes with the coronavirus. So this first paper really concentrates on the pre-cytokine storm and how that could really help put someone on a better track and alleviate this this death spiral, so to speak. So looking at these inflammatory markers will definitely elucidate where a person is on that healthcare continuum and stop this process. The second paper, we showed that we were taking care of 70 employees at one of the companies in Indiana. And we showed, based on functional medicine techniques, we were able to reverse a number of chronic diseases in them and save the company over $200,000 in a relatively short period of time. So next slide, how do we accomplish this? So with our program, we have a very, I would say, revealing questionnaire. It's about 120 questions that really delve into true root causes of potential diseases. And these questions are generally not asked by the traditional doctor network. Things like, do you have bleeding gums? Have you been exposed to mold? And the sort. So, and especially one very key one, do you have dental amalgam, silver fillings or gold fillings? And these are drivers of disease process. So, we've put together a very innovative platform where after these 120 questions are answered, you're given a score. Well, you're given a grade. So from A to F. And of course, everyone strives to have an A or a B, but if you get a C, D, or F, that tells you that you are not really on the correct pathway of ultimate health. Next slide, please. So we then, after doing the questionnaire, we have our patients do a biomarker, blood test. So we're looking at about 55 different biomarkers, but we're taking 20 of those and really diving deeply into how they affect, your immune system and inflammatory status and ultimate disease status. And oftentimes these are very silent markers, So, and they're, again, things like homocysteine and C-reactive protein, ferritin and fibrinogen levels aren't often, obtained from, let's say, a family practice doctor, traditional doctor, because I've had numerous patients that have come to me and I talk about that and they've never heard of homocysteine and C-reactive protein. So, and those are the true drivers of chronic disease. Cholesterol is really ultimately not necessarily the enemy when it comes to cardiovascular disease. So, and we also really take into account what are optimal ranges of these biomarkers. Because yes, in traditional labs, those are very broad ranges of what is considered normal, but we want to look at what is optimal, because once you are outside of the optimal range of any of these blood levels, your risk of early death increases. So we put together a very innovative, something that's very tangible and visceral to a patient, just like we grade you, but we also give you what we call the chronic disease temperature. So of course, everyone knows that 98.6 is a normal temperature, but based on various labs that we do and increments that are out of optimal range, you would get a corresponding increase in your temperature. So you can end up with a temperature of 102, 103, 104. So we found that this was something that patients could really, truly relate to and say, okay, I kind of get it now. How can I change my course and be healthier? Next slide, please. So what did I do and what can you do, in these times? So briefly, with my journey, and I'm still on it, of course, it is not a sprint, it is absolutely a marathon. So I had to address my underlying inflammatory markers, my mold toxicity, my subacute infections, and I had a lot of them, even though I felt pretty much fine. I worked a lot and I had some chronic fatigue, but from traditional labs, everything was normal. Absolutely everything was normal. So until I started delving into these deeper tests, did I find, oh, wow. So these are the things that is driving my glaucoma. So over the number of years have really optimized those things, changed my diet, gluten-free, dairy-free. I eat a whole lot more vegetables now. When I'm consuming meat, I try to do grass-fed beef, free-range chicken, and all of these things. Anything from the nutritional standpoint is absolutely critical. And of course, I found out that my nutrient deficiencies were quite significant. And from a functional medicine standpoint, we can actually test for, nutrient deficiencies in blood work. So we can see what your actual levels of the B vitamins are, zinc, vitamin C, glutathione, all of these things that are extremely important in terms of your immune system. So nutrients are the key here. As absolute baseline supplements, I take vitamin C, vitamin D, and of course we know all the studies show that those with a vitamin D level of less than 19 are at much, much higher risk of having bad outcomes from this coronavirus and ultimately death. And especially in the African American population, because of course we can get vitamin D from sunlight, but being darker skinned, you have to be out in the sun 2 to 3 hours a day to sometimes get your sufficient vitamin D levels. And that just really doesn't practically occur, at any level. So we all need to take extra vitamin D, but it's really important to test so that you know where you are. Other things that are important to take with vitamin D is vitamin K2 and magnesium. Magnesium is involved in over 800 enzymatic reactions in the body, so it's necessary. We're all very low in magnesium. But K2 is also essential, especially if you have cardiovascular disease, because when you take a lot of extra vitamin D, it's going to allow your body to absorb more calcium. Well, we know that vitamin D is critical for strong bones and so forth, but if you don't have adequate magnesium and K2 levels, that's not going to drive that calcium from your diet all the way to your bones. And guess where it ends up? Yes, in your arteries. So that is not where you want calcium to build up. I also take cod liver oil, very old school, but that is something that gives you natural vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, and vitamin A, which is very antiviral. I also take zinc, and zinc is critical because zinc helps to stop the replication of viruses. And as a side note, that is actually how hydroxychloroquine works. It works as what we call an ionophore, and it opens up the cells to allow zinc in to exert its effect. But there are also natural substances that you can use to enhance zinc, things like quercetin. So at the end of the day, we really, the brain knows exactly what the body needs. And yes, we need calories in, but we need nutrient dense calories to effectively keep ourselves healthy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter, for your very, very astute presentation. And I'm going to see if there are any questions first in the chat box, and then I have several. Tori, are there any questions in the chat box for Dr. Carter? Tori, are you unmuted?
I am now. I always have to wait for the box to come up to unmute it. So it's out of my control. But thank you. One of the issues or questions is that why is functional medicine not covered under a lot of the insurances, such as Medicare and others?
Well, that's a question that has, everyone wanting to have that done. But as functional medicine doctors, we spend a lot of time with patients, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, really digging in to find out the root causes of everything. So, and traditional medicine is just not, it's not geared to reimburse a physician adequately, let's say, with that type of time spent with a patient. So that's what I would say. So there are quite a number of functional medicine doctors out there, probably 30,000 plus, who have chosen to leave the traditional insurance market because of that, and really address all diseases, really. I mean, functional medicine doctors cover the gamut of every disease syndrome out there, and are quite successful at reversing the vast majority of diseases that we come across.
Let me jump in and make a comment. I support exactly what Dr. Carter is saying. We have a economic system in our country that requires a certain amount of illness in order to function. The healthcare industry absorbs more than $3 trillion a year. If people weren't sick, if you weren't sick, our economy would crash. So therefore, we've built up an entire income stream for pharmaceutical firms, insurance companies, etc., that requires you to be sick. If everybody woke up healthy tomorrow morning, our economy would go into the absolute toilet. We must also know, with all the modern investigative processes there are, with tracking, with phones and etc., there could be no illegal drug trade, no heroin, no nothing, if that weren't needed to make big people money. So therefore, from the beginning of this conversation today, I said you have to take personal responsibility because our economy is not made for your safety and your survival. You have to take your health into your own hands. For example, I have patients as a practicing physician. If Medicare or Medi-Cal or insurance won't pay for it, even if it will save their life, they won't buy it. So we've got to change our perspective and do what it takes for your own survival. And I salute what Dr. Carter is doing and saying, and we do need to find a way to add more functional medicine to what we do. Now, I only have one disagreement with you, sir. I've traveled a lot and worked in Africa, and a traditional doctor is usually a witch doctor. So maybe we can find a different way than just calling us witch doctors.
You know what, Dr. Maxey, I've noticed that Mr. Thomas Lewis takes at least 1 teaspoon of olive oil after dinner. Would you like to elaborate on that, Dr. Thomas Lewis? You're unmuted.
Well, Dr. Carter's really the expert on this, but our mentor at Harvard, the ophthalmologist, was reversing neurodegeneration in the 1980s, glaucoma particularly, then into Alzheimer's. And he actually recommended that every patient take 1 tablespoon. I'm making it, not too onerous at first, but 1 tablespoon after dinner every day. And then he says you do that for 6 months. And then what you do is you measure the red blood cell omega-3 complex to see if you're saturated. But that's what you really need. Your brain is a wiring system. It's all wire. Everything in our body is electrical. But the outside membrane of a neuron is what carries the electricity. And omega-3s are extremely critical to the composition of that membrane and the integrity of carrying electrical currents through your brain and through the rest of your body. So if you want a shorted wire, eat the processed food that's full of omega-6. But see, cod liver oil, like Dr. Carter said, it has a multiplicity of things. The previous speaker talked about not just one nutrient. So cod liver oil is a mixture of the EPA, DHA, saturated fats, which are actually healthy for you, and all the fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin K. So it's really 7 or 8 things at once. So it's really, really important. So I would recommend anybody who's been hesitant to eat fish or is not doing a lot of fish oil to really up their game. So a tablespoon is the equivalent to 15 capsules.
That's great. Let me pose another question while you're on, Dr. Lewis. First of all, my mother was from South Carolina, so every day I had to take cod liver oil.
Dr. Maxey, why do you think you're so brilliant and hardworking?
Exactly.
You got off to a really good start.
Recently, we've had some controversy with people taking statin drugs. And statin drugs are to reduce cholesterol. Now, it's come to light that cholesterol isn't necessarily the real basis of what we thought it was, the heart disease, but more or less it's the sugar. But the mechanism of action of statins includes the destruction of cell membranes. It also causes things like myositis, myalgias, and other things. And even though I do support the fact that we do need some pharmacological agents, sometimes they can also be damaging. especially in this area. And the patients that I treat, which are primarily patients with kidney disease and diabetes, there's a strong peripheral neuropathy that affects their lower extremities. And it is exactly as you say, affecting the outside lining of those nerves. And I'm wondering if you comment on
Dr.
how.
Maxey, have Simon put me back up into screen share. I just want to show you something because it's a very interesting story.
Okay.
You can go ahead and share your screen. It's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is a story. I just wrote a blog on this, okay?
Oh,
This is from Harvard Health Publishing, Harvard Medical School, trusted advice for a healthier life. And I've used this, and Dr. Carter has, to help people understand the importance of cholesterol since it came out in 2007. And Dr. Carter and I were discussing, we'd love to present on statins at some point in cholesterol because we've investigated the low end of it more than anybody else in the world, I think. But the point is, about 2 months ago, I got this uneasy feeling with all the censorship that this article goes against the grain of a lot of the philosophies of Big Pharma. So I downloaded it. And then I was doing a consult with Dr. Carter a few days ago with a patient, a microbiologist PhD, and I said, just Google cholesterol, brain, Harvard, and you'll see the article. Guess what? They took it down. Because it says cholesterol is essential for human health. It's the building block of all your hormones. More than simply holding cells together, these membranes have critical roles in cell functioning, allowing chemicals to pass in and out. That's your electrical system. So cholesterol is extremely important, and someone must have got to these people and said, this is incongruent with our financial mechanism of the industrial medical complex.
Let me make it more graphic and important of how important cholesterol is to the body. It is the basis of your sex hormones.
Absolutely. It says it right here. Testosterone and estrogens.
Absolutely.
So it's also part of your brain. So we need to take a look at this. Let's go to the chat box. Tori, anything in the chat box? Questions?
well, tumor necrosis factor is also important in the etiology of glaucoma. Let me open it up here. Oh, this is Dr. Davis was making comment. Can everyone see the chat?
Read the question.
I'll read it. Well, it doesn't look like a question. It's a statement, but I'll read it. Tumor necrosis factor is also important in the etiology of glaucoma. Cut trans fatty acids, steer clear of saturated fatty acids, increase green leafy vegetables, ginkgo biloba, beet juice, berries, other supplements like Nepal plum juice, tart cherry, blueberry juice, vitamin C, resveratrol. I know. The screen keeps moving. And other antioxidants, coenzyme Q, and even milk thistle.
Absolutely. And so from the functional medicine approach, glaucoma, has so many underlying causes, especially, again, I go back to the subacute infections, which really not too many people really appreciate and know about. So again, Dr. Tremp was ahead of his time, at Harvard. He's the only ophthalmologist that I've ever heard of who actually tested people's blood levels, with biomarkers and infections. I've never been to an eye doctor, and I would posit to say that none of you have ever been to an eye doctor where they've drawn your blood. So, so that's a critical underlying cause. And yes, nutrients, all of the nutrients that were just noted here, extremely important. Gut health, absolutely important. 70 to 80% of our immune health is in our gut. So, and most of us have some degree of leaky gut, thereby compromising our immune system. The food of today is generally just not recognized by the body as food, so, and it is unfortunate in its driving disease. So, and a comment about the iron. You were saying, Dr. Maxey, that 60% of your patients have low iron. Well, I would probably also say that that's mostly due to absorption problems. And we also go back to subacute infections. H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori is very, very prevalent. And when you have a preponderance of that, it can disrupt your body's ability to make adequate HCl. Also, if you are on acid blockers, which a ton of people are, the Zantac, Pepcid, and Propulsid, all of those, that disrupts your body's ability to make adequate acid. So now you are behind the 8 ball again. You're not absorbing nutrients, and iron is one of those. So again, from the functional medicine standpoint, we ask those questions and show people, all right, this is not a good medication for you to be on, especially if you are manifesting disease syndromes.
You know, a comment on the tumor necrosis factor. What we showed in our paper on the cytokine storm is that when cytokines like TNF-alpha are up, so are other very easily measured markers like sedimentation rate, fibrinogen, D-dimer, LDH, C-reactive protein. So rather than testing for the expensive interleukins and TNF-alpha, we use a surrogate for that. That's very inexpensive. You know, so, and that's part of our chronic disease temperature algorithm.
What is that surrogate?
No, the surrogates are all of those. Dr. Mays, that would be sedimentation rate, C-reactive protein, homocysteine, you know, vitamin D levels. If your vitamin D is low, you have a propensity for your TNF-alpha to go out of control. Uric acid is a marker of inflammation and hypoxia. So we don't use one marker, and it's well published, and you know, we included that in our reference list, that you're much better off looking at a constellation of markers across many different facets of disease mechanism than looking at one. That's why the cholesterol thing has really gone in the tank. We keep looking at the same one over and over again, and no doctor is evolving because they're stuck in this box. So we expand the horizons by looking at, like Dr. Carter said, we look at 55 markers, but then we zero in on 20 that are really telling the story about chronic disease. And cholesterol is one of those. If your cholesterol is too low or too high, almost everything is a U curve. You know, you don't want your blood pressure too low, you don't want it too high. You don't want your cholesterol too low, you don't want your cholesterol too high. And we've charted this out. Me being the biostatistician and scientist, I'd love to show you our charts on early mortality versus biomarkers. It's very it's eye-opening, if you will, in terms of where the reference ranges are today compared to where early mortality sets in. Let me give you one example. The Women's Health Initiative and Nurses Health Study, 138,000 women followed prospectively. If I take two women, groups, one has a white blood cell count of 4,700 and one has a white blood cell count of 6,700. 6,700 is well within the standard of care, normal. If I follow them for 5 years, 6 years, 50% more of these are dead from cardiovascular disease. Nobody wants to have a white blood cell count of 6,700 if you really, you know, want to live a long, healthy life. Yet 10,800 is the limit for normal in the standard of care. So 6,700 wouldn't even be flagged. We're looking at smoldering rather than, you know, inflamed. And I think that's where everybody has to think about it. And the other thing, we look at where you are on the continuum. You're not either here or there, you know, healthy or sick. You're somewhere in the continuum. And what the chronic disease temperature does is tells you where you are on this chronic health continuum. And then our process running the assessment and coaching you in the right direction with nutrition and other things brings you down that continuum. And we publish that as well. Dr. Carter.
That's great. Another thing I like to bring up with this iron thing, there's an awful lot of African Americans specifically that have diabetes or pre-diabetes. And what a lot of people don't realize that this leads to a condition called CKD, or chronic kidney disease. Mm-hmm. The minute your so-called kidney function goes below 60%, above 60 to 120% is normal, but you start retaining substances such as inorganic phosphorus, and that affects your parathyroid gland, that affects your calcium level, et cetera. But more importantly, there's a hormone that's made by your kidneys called erythropoietin. Erythropoietin manufactures red blood cells. And a lot of the deficiencies around red blood cells and iron come about due to that early degree of non-clinical renal dysfunction. And we have the largest degree of renal disease on earth, secondary to both high blood pressure as well as secondary to diabetes. So in our people, even though we make up less than 13% of the population of the United States, we make up more than 50% of the population of people on dialysis, and maybe even more of those that have chronic kidney disease. Let's go again I want to go to all of our speakers. And first of all, I want to thank them for the contribution that they've made today. Dr. Penn Nabrett, Dr. Prasad, and Dr. Carter, and also Dr. Lewis, who has joined in. But I want to see if there are any questions in the chat box, and then if not, I'm going to do a round robin, and then I'm going to invite one of our special guests, Pastor Jones, back. Are there any questions specifically in the chat box, Tori?
Yes, there's one that says, how should one go about getting nutrient levels tested? Then the next question says, go right to the lab, ask your primary care physician. Is there a billing code for that as a preventative measure?
So now from a serum level, you're taking your blood from a LabCorp or a Quest, which are the biggest labs out there.
Right.
You can get a decent idea of where you are, especially vitamin D. And that's a very accurate number. But you can also test for your B vitamins, magnesium. Actually, you really want a red blood cell magnesium level, because what is ultimately the effective nutrient is to find out what is actually in the cell. So you can get good ideas from that. As a functional medicine doctor, I do a very involved micronutrient test. It tests about 36 nutrients from a company called Vibrant America. And that gives you serum levels and red blood cell and white blood cell levels. Because again, we want to know the nutrients that are actually inside the cell. So that is, of course, not a test that can be covered by insurance, but it's an amazing test that I would recommend, especially if individuals have diseases that they are struggling with. It really illustrates where they are kind of behind the 8 ball. So, yeah.
So Dr. Carter, are you saying Vibrant America?
Vibrant. So you have to
America.
go through to a practitioner to get that test done. So, but Vibrant America is the website, and they have a whole host of other tests that I do for my patients. Amazing tests for gluten sensitivity is called the Wheat Zoomer, and people really don't appreciate how bad gluten can be for them. Again, the food of the day, the wheat of today is different from 50 years ago. So from hybridization, now the gluten or gliadin content is 50 times higher than it used to be. And this is seen by the body as a foreign invader, and it results in leaky gut, which ultimately causes, the body having an immune reaction to it, and thereby, having diseases just from eating wheat. So, and you don't have to have GI symptoms, and that's a really, really important thing. So, and the test that you would get from LabCorp only tests for what they call one epitope of gliadin, but there are numerous ones, and Vibrant America actually tests for the most. And for the vast majority of people, especially I've tested, almost 100% come up as gluten sensitive if they're eating traditional wheat products.
And I
Wow.
want Dr. Prasad to also address the question of what to take.
Where's Dr. Prasad? Dr. Prasad? I don't see him on my screen
Okay.
at all, but
Very
he could be on the next one.
Let me put the question then to Ms. Penn Nabrit in terms of what you do in terms of nutrition and nutrient. What would be the ideal garden products to suggest daily basis?
I'm a big proponent of mixing fresh leafy vegetables with root produce. So for example, I'm big on things like juicing parsley to control blood pressure and eating roasted beets, and we grow a lot of potatoes also. And so part of what, I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation because I'm not a physician. I've really have been looking more at, we've been doing some unofficial analysis of the members of our congregation. We have so many elderly people in our congregation that we don't announce your birthday unless you're 90. And seriously, because we wouldn't be doing anything else.
Right.
So the first person that I interviewed was Sister Logan. She has since died, but she was 103 when I did my interview with her. Part of what was so consistent is these are all people whose grandparents or great-grandparents were enslaved, so they didn't really have access to the kinds of traditional medicine that we think of as being normative today. And so I was trying to figure out how is it that these people are not just alive, but as active and as engaged as they are. I mean, one of the big issues that we have at our church is we can't get these old people out of the way so that other people can do stuff. Like they're still running the kitchen, okay? They're still running the kitchen. And so I was trying to figure out, how do you get to be, my mother still teaches a Sunday school class she joined when she was 13, and she will be 90 this week.
They didn't have Burger Kill on that Devils.
Well, and there was no eating out.
Right.
Most of the food was grown and consumed and eaten. So the issue about smoking, drinking, sleeping is also something that I think is underestimated. But this idea of you go to bed on time, you're not sitting up all night watching television, you go to bed, you get up. This idea of, so my mother fell 2 years ago and bumped her head, so it's a lot of blood. Went to the doctor, the emergency room. They asked what prescription she's on, and she said, I'm not on any prescriptions. And they turned to us and said, oh, she must be concussed. What prescriptions is your mother on? We're like, she's not on any prescriptions. He was like, well, let me get your glasses so you can read this. She's like, I don't need glasses, I can see that. I think that this combination of community and nutrition, so that when we talk about holistic health, I mean, yes, you should be eating beets, you should be eating peas, you should be eating leafy green vegetables, you should be eating lots of spinach, but you also need to be in community. And I think a lot of people are alienated, and as a consequence, so we're talking about people who, like I said, with my mother's Sunday school class, these women are all in their 90s. They've been seeing each other twice a week for Bible study and Sunday school since they were 12 and 13 years old. There's a certain level of health that happens in community. And I think it's hard to quantify that. So we see when it's absent, but we can't always see why it's necessary to create that. So I think as we often are pursuing wonderful opportunities, I said, I left Columbus to go to Wellesley. I came back, I went to law school. I met my husband at Dartmouth. I think, our kids went off to Princeton. You do these wonderful things, but figuring out how to combine that, because what profiteth a man if he gain the whole world? And not just lose your soul, but lose your health, right? You lose your health. So this idea of gardening requires that you be present. And I think that's a problem. How do we convince people to invest the time into working in the dirt?
I think that is so important what you've been talking about today. I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce another special guest for a brief comment, and if we're fortunate, a rendition. Is Pastor Sabine Jones available? And he happens to be much into health and nutrition as well. Pastor Jones?
He's muted. He was unmuted. Simon, could you unmute Pastor Jones, please? There you go. Pastor Jones? Uh-oh, it's fluctuating.
Sorry.
It's called technology.
Okay.
Praise the Lord, everybody.
Praise the Lord.
I'm excited to be here today listening to this conversation very attentively. Just really excited about the lady who just finished. Those wonderful 90-year-old people who are jamming and living. And all of them, and I can really relate to that card level. I used to get it every morning going out the door from South Georgia, you know, my God. Along with a couple of drops of turpentine on sugar as well. Most of y'all can't handle that, but that's real stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to say just a few words about Luke. You know, I've been doing some reading and studying with a man called Dr. Robert Henderson, and he gives us a reference in Luke chapter 11 and 18 of a man will always pray, and he talks about a relationship that's necessary with God as you approach him that requires a protocol. And this protocol requires that it's beyond the friend and beyond the neighbor relationship. And it is a way that God utilizes this relationship to answer very difficult prayers to be answered. And many of those answers relate to health. And my desire is that God would allow me to be able, in some way, to interface with people like you, to test out this new thing that I've become aware of, hopefully being able to integrate it into the context of what you're doing so that it can be a fountain of inspiration and good news for those who are having health issues. And I just believe that in the process of doing it, it might be beneficial for me. I was listening to the eye doctor, you know, I'm having some problems right now. And hopefully it's gonna take a turn for the better. And we're hoping that it would be of great benefit to me to be in touch with you at some point way or another. But also I'd like to share a little song with you that I've been practicing with myself. It's made popular by a South African. It's called Falling in Love with Jesus. The best thing that ever happened to me. And I am excited to share just a little bit of this with you. Ooh, ooh, Lord. Ooh, falling in love with Jesus, falling in love with Jesus, falling in love with Jesus was the best thing I ever done. his arms I feel protected. In his arms, never disconnected. In his arms, I feel protected. There's no place I'd rather be. Oh, falling in love with Jesus, falling in love with Jesus, falling in love with Jesus was the best thing I ever done. In his arms I feel protected. In his arms, never disconnected. Falling in love with Jesus, the best thing I've ever done. Thank you so much for indulging me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Pastor Jones. Let's go back to the chat box. Are there any new questions in the chat box? If not, I'm going to go around to our speakers.
Well, there's one. Dr. Carter does micronutrient testing. There is even a home test strip, but they are about $200. Do you recommend any home test nutrient kit for anyone?
Well, again, I mean, it's better to do blood testing to really get an accurate analysis of that. However, Vibrant America now does, they do have a finger prick test, which tests about 28, I believe it's 28 nutrients, but it's all serum, but it's still, it's much better than what one can get from just LabCorp or Quest. So yeah, you're correct. I believe it's between $200 or $300 for that, and that is actually a home-based test. But the most accurate would be a blood test.
I'd like to invite comments from the following people in the following order. Brief comments from Dr. Richard Williams, if he's on, Dr. Helen Davis, and Dr. Carolyn Towler on the speaker's comments.
I saw Dr. Davis and Carolyn.
Okay, if not, I'm going to go to our speakers for the last word. Miss Penn Nabrit, would you give some final comments before we close briefly?
She's muted also.
Ms. Penn Nabrit, can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Thank you. Thank you for unmuting me. I just wanted to say thank you so much for the invitation. This was really very enlightening, and even though I'm an old philosophy major, so the hard sciences are not in my wheelhouse, but this was really, really good. And so thank you. I really appreciated the opportunity to participate.
Okay. As soon as I get old enough, I want to join your church.
I know that's right.
Dr. Carter, would you have some final comments?
I would just want to thank you again for inviting me to this, and in light of the coronavirus, you know, that is top of mind. But I just want to say that Alzheimer's, unfortunately, now is the third leading cause of death, and we have young people getting Alzheimer's in their 40s. So it's really, really incumbent on people to understand the true causes of Alzheimer's. It's not just genetic and it's not amyloid. So that's something that, you know, Dr. Lewis and I are very passionate about. And I'm also trained by Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote the second book, The End of Alzheimer's. And, you know, both of these books highlight all of the underlying factors which drive Alzheimer's and of course, other chronic diseases, which go back to what's happening with the coronavirus. You know, the vast majority of people, a big sector of the population is individuals in nursing homes, you know, who are dying from the coronavirus. And we know that the food that you get in nursing homes isn't organic and really good for you, and they are nutriently depleted. So we really have to focus on those things.
I thank you also for your contribution today. It's been great. Our speakers, I want to go back to something very basic that we say every week, that a lot of death and destruction can be stopped by personal hygiene, by frequent washing of your hands, by keeping your hands out of your face, out of your eyes, out of your mouth. We know that it is important to watch how you touch surfaces. We know that this virus and other pathogens can stay alive on smooth surfaces, such as countertops, etc., for a long time. It is very important to remember that this virus can be aerosolized and can remain in the air for 15 to 20 minutes, not just a few seconds. I spoke with a gentleman just this week. He said, well, being at the beach is okay. It is okay if you stay away from people, but if you walk through the breath stream, the conversation stream of people who happen to be infected, that can be something that you will inhale. So you must also be cautious of how close you are to somebody who is talking. In the sense of going to restaurants, I recommend that you don't dine in, that if you do go to a restaurant, that you have an outdoor restaurant where you have appropriate social distancing, that if you're buying foods, fresh produce from a grocery store, that you can clean it. After washing it, you can do a percent solution with a teaspoon of baking soda and 8 ounces of water to clean those vegetables. And it's very important to do that. If you do eat out, try not to eat from the buffet where foods are lukewarm and can be a breeding pot for microorganisms. If you're wearing masks, which I suggest that you do, if you're flying, you need to wear an N95 mask. And we said before that N95 masks should be reserved for health professionals, but if you're flying on a plane, it is a good idea to use that type of mask as well as other protective material. It is important. Will somebody please mute their phone? If you are flying, you do need to consider quarantining yourself before being with people that are vulnerable to this. We know that there are many secondary effects coming up after the coronavirus, that there are strokes, there are coagulopathies that are happening, heart disease and renal disease, even occurring in the pediatric population. So everything we've been saying all of these weeks still rings true, especially the micronutrients. Now, I'm not an expert on vitamins, but I take prenatal vitamins. And I'm going to have a conversation with Dr. Carter and Dr. Prasad about other things that I can do to protect myself. We're going to close in a few minutes. I'm going to stress that the Black Health Trust appreciates all of you joining us. We do need your financial support to continue to do these productions. Go to our website at blackhealthtrust.org and you will be able to donate if you so choose. We appreciate that. I'm going to recognize for a final brief comment. I see the name of my colleague, Dr. Tyler. Dr. Tyler, a brief comment.
Hi, I would just like to say this was a wonderful call, and it might seem overwhelming to a lot of people because of all the things that were discussed. But if you get right back down to the basics, start with the things that you know you can do. One thing is to eliminate as many processed foods as possible. Try to just cook your own food. Try to stay away from restaurants, because unless you're eating organic, you're eating pesticides. So just think about that every time you go to fast food or even a restaurant. Just know that you're eating pesticides and you're eating GMOs. So think twice about whether or not it's better for you to go into that restaurant or to go and get some fresh vegetables and fresh meat and cook it yourself. It's not as convenient, but it's for your health. And thank you, everybody, for validating functional and integrative medicine. It was exciting to hear from all of you. It's a bigger world out there than what we know.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Brenda Lee Yeager to have our final word as we close out. Brenda Lee.
Thanking everyone for today. And grace, my word for today is grace. So I'll just say, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. It was grace that brought us safe this far. And grace will lead, oh, grace will lead us on. So the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the peace of God enfolds us again, and the presence of God watches over us wherever we are, all our loved ones, until we meet again next week. God bless and keep you all.
I'd like to give thanks to our hostess, Tori Bailey. I'd like to thank each of our speakers. I'd like to thank Pastor Shaveen Jones. And I'd like to thank Brenda Lee Yeager, my sister. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.